Without further ado, welcome our speaker, Dr. Rhoda Mhiripiri-Reed. Her role is serving in public education for over 15 years. Improving the lives of others has been a driving force throughout her life. During her time as a student at Bloomington Kennedy High School, she became intrigued with community service while in the role of a candy striper for the Minnesota Masonic Home for the Elderly. While attending Yale, she became even more involved in the community through tutoring adolescents, volunteering weekly at the local Head Start, and serving meals at the homeless shelter. These experiences helped her realize the impact that quality education can have in young people's lives, and she decided to make education her lifelong ambition. After graduating from Yale with her teaching license, she returned to Minnesota to begin her career as an educator. She taught social studies at Highland Park Junior High in St. Paul, and later served as an assistant principal at her alma mater, Bloomington Kennedy High School, and then as a high school principal for 5 years at Champlain Park in the Anoka-Hennepin district. She was soon after admitted to the Harvard University's new. Although she loves work, she spends weekend hours exercising, bargain shopping, watching reality TV.
Middle of a pandemic. I had slides, but I thought like it just might make it a little bit too formal in a way that we don't need it to be. So I thought I could talk and invite you to ask questions at any time, especially if I say something that really piques your curiosity. So if that's okay, then I'm just going to share sort of what it's been like. And I welcome your questions. A little bit first about Hopkins. We are a district of 7,000 students, and I would say it's a fairly mid-sized district. So in the state of Minnesota, there are about 333 public school districts, all from ranging from maybe 100 students to the largest district is Anoka-Hennepin. And I actually used to be a principal at Champlain Park, which is one of 5 high schools in the Anoka-Hennepin district. And they're the largest district. They probably have close to 50,000 students. And then Minneapolis and St. Paul are the second 2 largest districts. So a district of about 7,000 students it's not too small in the scheme of things, just because there are a lot of districts that only have a few hundred. But it also is not the size of a Minneapolis or St. Paul. We have 10 learning centers. We have an early learning center that has preschool. We have 6 elementary buildings that serve kindergartners through 6th graders. We also have preschool at all of our elementary sites. We have 2 junior highs, 7, 8, 9, and then a single high school. Our high school serves about 1,600 students. So I would say leading a district in sort of a non-pandemic, like in normal times, is a very busy and rewarding and challenging job. But all of us who are sort of in the thick of it, running schools, trying to work together to run the district in the middle of a pandemic has been a frightful challenge. There have been a lot of rewards and celebrations along the way, but as you can imagine, we're all very challenged by COVID and all of the havoc that COVID has brought upon us, and I think that speaks that is very, very true in a educational setting, especially public education, because we do have to follow what the Minnesota Department of Education asks of us. And so we, like many private schools, were able to open their doors and deliver in-person services 5 days a week to all of their students. They had money to buy desk shields for every child, right? The situation, the financial situation, and also the sort of the parameters of what the Minnesota Department of Education called the Safe Learning Plan, which was every district's opening plan in the middle of COVID. There were a lot of restrictions that we had to follow. So it has been very different and I would say very difficult for our families, because the majority of our students have not been able to come in for in-person instruction 5 days a week. So, so what else can I say about Hopkins? So 7,000 students, 10 buildings. We serve all of Hopkins, 2/3 of Minnetonka, half of Golden Valley, and then small portions of Edina, Eden Prairie, Plymouth, and St. Louis Park. So we're a geographical space of about 29 square miles, fairly large. We also open enroll about 25% of our students from, all over Minneapolis, lots of cities. We get students who open enroll into the district. Perhaps some of you know that open enrollment, which means any family can choose any school. They don't have to choose a school that sort of in their district residence area. Any family can choose any school as long as they can get their kid to school and there's a seat for that child. So open enrollment is an opportunity that is statewide, and many districts benefit from it, and many districts have been harmed by it as well. So it is one of those things that has sort of its ups and downs. About almost 50% of our students are not white. So we have 50% white, almost 50% not white. Our after English, our top 3 language groups are Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. African American is also another one of our larger subgroups, although obviously English is spoken by those students and families. And beyond those top language groups, we have 71 languages represented throughout Hopkins. So we're a microcosm of the world. You go in our schools and walk into our classrooms and you literally see kids from all over the world. And some have, been here for generations, and some have been here for a week, right? So it's a really interesting place to be if you ever want to just, tour classrooms for a day, and you'll see that Hopkins is very reflective of the world. So we like to say Hopkins in the world. Hopkins is the world, and the world is Hopkins. It's one of my favorite slogans. So we have about 700 teachers, and then if you include non-licensed staff in our total staff count, we have about 1,300 staff, including some casual employees. So that's a little bit about Hopkins. We are a district that welcomed students each and every day up to March of this past spring. If you remember, in March, that's when everybody realized what this pandemic actually was, or that the virus was actually a pandemic and that it would have some very serious health implications. And so we call March through June distance learning 1.0. That's when a lot of schools and districts shut down and people went into full distance learning mode. It was at that time that we sort of realized that we were moving into a new reality, and that school would probably not ever be the same again. And I think that one of the things that's been challenging is that, as human beings, we have different relationships with change. And, some of us love change, and some of us don't like it because it's stressful, or because we don't like not being able to predict our future, or we don't want to learn new habits or new practices, right? Like replacing old practices and behaviors with new ones can be kind of an emotional or frightful challenge. And so it's been an interesting experience knowing that within one organization, we have some people who really want to just go back to normal, right? That is the reality that helps them thrive and makes them feel more comfortable. And then we have, in the same organization, we have lots of people who are hoping we never go back to normal, and who are looking at this current situation as an opportunity to transform public education and to really articulate what hadn't worked before and really hadn't been working for decades, and identify what are some possibilities moving forward. So that has been just a very interesting space to be. And, you know, as a leader, I'm always thinking about how can I support all people in the organization, regardless of the pace at which they want to, you know, move forward, right? Because you have people who like want to move forward very slowly. You have people who are, you know, good with like a pretty moderate clip, and then you have people who just want to like run into the future. And how do you support all people with no judgment? I think is a leadership challenge, you know, for any of us leading an organization, because change really is inevitable. Um, we do have a vision in Hopkins. We call it Vision 2031 because 2 years ago, our kindergartners at the time, right now they're second graders, but our kindergartners at the time, and now they're second graders, they're the class of 2031. And we asked ourselves, like, what do we need to do differently in Hopkins so that by the time these kids graduate from high school, we can confidently say that we're cultivating the kind of college students, the kind of employees, the kind of you know, citizens that everybody wants to, you know, be around, because these individuals are thoughtful, they're empathetic, they add value, they have good critical thinking skills, they're globally minded, they know how to engage in perspective taking, right? All of those qualities that, for example, Cargill and Optum have told us, like, we look for those same things when we're hiring employees. So we know we're on the right track with the way that we've identified our the key characteristics of the Hopkins graduate. So we call this Vision 2031, and really it's about transforming schools from the ground up so that students and adults are engaged in self-directed learning. We're evolving educators' skill sets. We're facilitating the opportunity to learn anytime, anywhere, rather than 25 to 30 students in a box with one teacher all day long. Like, that is a really old model and it doesn't work for many of our students. And so how do we, you know, how can we capitalize in this moment in time to think about how education, especially public education, could be different moving forward? So that's been a lot of our, excuse me, a lot of our just like visioning, forward thinking conversation. So I talked about distance learning 1.0 back in March through June, and then the school year ended, and then we were like, oh crap, like COVID's not going away. You know, like, what is the start of school even going to look like? Like, how do you start school when you don't know if kids can come back to school, right? I mean, it was just a really sort of bizarre like place to be, actually. So what we decided is we were going to set up summer task forces. We invited all staff to consider themselves as a thinker for the organization. And so we had an early learning and kindergarten task force, a grades 2 through 6 task force, a secondary task force, a task force that we called, it was a task force that was focused on building anti-racist learning model. And then we had a staff and student wellness task force, because one of our predictions was that we would all, including our students, families, staff, we would all be challenged, like with just mental health stresses from being, you know, in this pandemic and just worrying about everything. So we had a wellness task force. And all along, since February, all along, we had been operating a pandemic mitigation and response task force. So that has been a weekly meeting of about 40 leaders. We meet every Friday, and we've been doing that since March, just to say, okay, what's our current situation? What's the health data? You know, do we need to pivot? What are the nurses reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So we added all these other task forces so that teachers and paras, and we even had some students getting involved in the thinking around, okay, we have to get ready for fall. What are we going to do? Right? So that's basically how we came up with the hybrid models. I mean, we theorized that, remember when the governor was saying, like, you can't have more than 10 or 25 people in a group, right? And people have to stay 6 weeks, 6 feet apart, right? Like we theorized that some of these parameters would continue to be in place. And so we told ourselves, well, probably, I mean, if COVID is still bad in the fall, probably we're not going to be able to have 100% of our kids in school all the time, because there's no way we could keep people 6 feet apart if we did that, right? So that's where some of the hybrid models came to, you know, like be ideated. And it was really helpful to have staff on board from this summer. So I said before that, MDE, the Minnesota Department of Education, had finally released a whole, like I think it was 101 pages on all of the considerations that must be looked at as each district or school is putting together their safe learning model, their safe learning plan for the start of the year. And so, you know, eventually we were able to put our eyes on that and then start finalizing some of these plans that had begun in the summer. So when we launched in the fall, we had preschoolers pretty much coming in every day. The classes were smaller. We were able to socially distance even in preschool. I mean, and you know, like when a preschooler wants a hug, like you give them a hug, right? So, you know, it's this idea. We did have to grapple with, like, what does effective socially distancing even look like, right? Because our kids need to be loved, and if a kid needs a hug, are we going to say, you know, please stay away, or are we going, you know, like we actually had those conversations. But, you know, in preschool, I think it was like 5 and under, the masks were not required. And so we were able to be a little bit more forgiving at the preschool level. We had our kindergartners and first graders coming in 4 days a week. And these were families who opted into an in-person experience. So basically, back in the summer, like late July, maybe August, we asked families, if school starts tomorrow, would you choose 100% distance learning option, or would you choose an in-person experience? And we can't promise you that it's going to be 1 day a week or 2 days a week or 3 days a week. Do you prefer full-time distance learning or in-person? And so we were able to identify families who were opting into a full-time distance learning program. And then it was about 30% of our families, pretty much elementary through secondary. You know, the actual percentage of families opting into full-time distance learning was a little bit different building to building, but it was about a third of families district-wide. So then of the students remaining, then we had to figure out, okay, well, what was the in-person experience going to look like? So for preschool, it was pretty much every day. For kindergarten and first grade, and we did prioritize bringing in younger students as much as we could. And so kindergartners and first graders came in 4 days a week. Second through sixth graders came in 2 days a week. And our secondary students, we have not brought in all semester. Now that's like 95% of them. We have had our special education students, so our students who have individualized learning plans or have some unique learning needs where, you know, their learning is going to suffer if they stay in distance learning. We did identify those students, and we've been bringing in those students. But the vast majority of secondary students have been in full-time distance learning, which has been hard for some of them. But I do feel good about our process to identify the individuals who truly would suffer, either mental health wise or academically, behaviorally. We've been serving those students in person, not every day, but weekly. And then all during this time, we would get data from the county. Maybe you've seen this data. Hennepin County releases the data every Thursday, And it's basically the number of positive cases per 10,000 people tested. And they break it down by city and county. Apparently, some counties or some cities don't release the data. I'm not sure, but most of the cities in Hennepin County have been releasing their city level data. So we've been watching that. And, as you know, the numbers were projected to dramatically increase for this winter season. And so, it eventually became very difficult to staff huge numbers of students in person when huge numbers of staff were saying, I don't want to take the risk, right? Like, we literally have been kind of trying to figure out how we can meet families' expectations and support staff at the same time. And throughout much of this time, it's felt very much at odds, right? Because staff don't want their health implicated by providing in-person services, and families are like, are you kidding? Like, I have to work, I cannot stay home and monitor my children Monday through Friday. Even if, parents don't have to work, that's just a nightmare, right? Monitoring your kids every day, day in and day out. So it's been a real challenge. Currently, most of our students are in distance learning. Our last day of in-person for elementary was the Thursday before Thanksgiving week. And then this past Monday and Tuesday, right before Thanksgiving, we had school, but our innovation, design, and learning department, which some districts call teaching and learning, they put together some choice options for students so that teachers could spend the time planning for distance learning. And then beginning this week, so yesterday was our first day of official distance learning for elementary. We do have we do have lots of kids coming in for in-person in elementary. There's probably about 170 at Meadowbrook, probably I think it was 90 at Eisenhower, another 70 maybe at Tanglin, 90 at Alice Smith, 35 at Glen Lake, and maybe 70 at Gatewood. So we worked with our principals and counselors to identify students who really would be of detriment, like really would be damaged by a long-term distance learning experience. And we invited those families to consider bringing their children in for in-person support, mostly staffed by paraprofessionals, which is another hard conversation because our paraprofessionals are some of our lowest paid employees. And, to ask teachers, to give teachers teachers do have to stay at home or, alone in their classroom facilitating distance learning. So we did need some adults to come in and supervise the children coming in. And that's another hard conversation when we're relying on our lowest paid employees, again, putting their health at risk. And we do follow strict mitigation measures. Everyone is masked. Everyone social distances. Our custodians are cleaning on a very robust and regular basis. All of our HVAC systems were updated. So the mitigation measures are in place. I think it's just takes an emotional toll on some of our individuals who have felt torn. All throughout this, we have provided childcare to students and families who need it. We absolutely are required to provide free childcare to children of Tier 1 workers. And then we also provide paid during the daycare for families who just cannot stay at home. So like my daughter is in Kids & Co right now, and she comes in 4 days a week because there's nobody home. So I've talked for a long time about a little bit about Hopkins and then sort of what the pandemic has has compelled us to consider as we're in this different space. And I just want to be mindful of the amount of time that I've taken to share information with you, and to see if you have any questions, and feel free to ask whatever you want, really. I like to be open with people. I might not have the answer, but I could get it and, forward it to Melissa. Well, Melissa Ness is one of our principals, so I keep wanting to call Michelle Ness Melissa, but I can forward to Michelle if you have some specific questions that I'm not able to answer. But what questions might you have?
Betsy?
So I'll just start off by saying that I have been super impressed with the kids' ability to wear a mask. And my son has not lost a mask all year, which I'm just like, I still can't believe that he hasn't lost it. But I just want to give a shout out to our young learners, because they roll with it, and they pivot with such ease for the most part. And I have not heard my son complain once about wearing a mask. So shout out to all of them. It's the adults in the room usually that are a little bit more hesitant to roll with it. I would love to know a little bit about the conversations you're having with other educational learners in other districts. What are the themes? What are the shared challenges? What are some things that may be unique to what Hopkins is experiencing because you're comparing it to other districts?
It's a good question, Betsy. And you're right about the masks. Like, that was one of the things we were so surprised by. Like, in the beginning of this, we were like, these kids are not going to wear their masks the whole day. They're going to have a fit, or they're just going to be like done with it, or they're just going to run off, and that did not happen. These kids have been wearing their masks with fidelity and with ease. And it was one of those kind of surprising things, a pleasant surprise, I would say. So there's a organization called the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and I see another board member on the call, Steve Adams. Hi, Steve. So Steve also attends the formal meetings that this organization has, AMSD for short, but AMSD has been hosting weekly conversations for superintendents for the last few months, just so we can get together and be like, what's happening? So a few themes. One, enrollment is down. Enrollment is down in Hopkins. It's down in the vast majority of public school districts across the state. And so that has been a real challenge, especially, and it's so disappointing because prior to this year, we had been working so hard on boosting our enrollment and really like helping families understand that if they choose Hopkins, like, we will do our absolute best to serve you well, like you will get a good experience here, right? And so for the past two falls, we had increases in enrollment even beyond what we projected, which we hadn't seen in 9-10 years. So to have our enrollment be off by a few more than 100 students is really disappointing. We did do kind of a calling campaign. I'd organized my cabinet we divided the list of people who made other educational decisions, and we called all of these families just to say, hey, we understand you made a different educational choice, and would you mind sharing why? What could we do differently? And mostly it was people needed in person, right? So we had a lot of secondary and elementary families go to some of the privates who are offering in person. We also had an increase in the number of families who opted into homeschooling. And then there's something called microschooling that's been happening nationwide, which is families getting together and pooling their resources to hire a teacher for their pod of students. And so we saw, in fact, Jeff Radel, our Glen Lake principal, was with staff in the staff lounge one afternoon, and they saw a whole group of kids who lived across the street from the school. They must have been on a break from their pod learning, and they walked down to the little, those little neighborhood library things to look for a book. And it was like, oh no, we could be educating those kids. But, in the midst of a serious health pandemic, families do have to make a choice. We have to respect those decisions. And there's a lot of choice out there for families. So enrollment has been a theme in those conversations. We've also talked about just like teacher burnout and staffing and the challenges of para and teacher staffing. So one of the reasons we couldn't get our secondary in-person model up and running is we used a number of our secondary paraprofessionals to staff the in-person learning for elementary. And so it was really hard for us to figure out how we were going to run both. So staffing has been like a continual challenge. We'll sometimes have town halls with the governor or with the commissioner of health and education. And so there are opportunities to sort of talk about like statewide themes. Like one of the things that recently came out was giving teachers additional prep time. And so just like union issues, because in our context, we already had Fridays set aside as a collaboration day, and we didn't want to shorten the school day for elementary kids to increase prep time for teachers when we had already established some collaboration time on Fridays. So that's kind of a long answer, but those are some of the themes, and it's really all centered around like, how do we do this differently with a shortage of resources? Because when enrollment falls, then you're going to be getting fewer dollars, and how do you sustain that moving forward? So those are some of the things that have come up, Betsy.
I have a question.
Yes, Peggy.
This is maybe a little off the wall, but I'm wondering how might the proposed state constitutional amendment to make education a civil right, how might that affect the Hopkins School District?
That's a good question also. And I was hearing your beautiful music before. Did you turn it off?
No, it quit.
Oh. Okay. I was hoping you could just like play, like turn your mic on and then just play it throughout.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it because I was wondering if it could be heard.
Oh yeah, I heard it. It was so pretty and very calming. So I don't have a good answer for you because at this point it's all theoretical. Like everybody is wondering, okay, well, we've barely defined adequate. Now we have to struggle with the definition of quality, right? Because they want to replace that that language in there, take out adequate, replace with quality. And then this whole question of whether or not funding is implicated or attached to a constitutional language change like this. And then I think the third concern or wondering is whether or not it's an invitation for, an invitation or a mechanism for strengthening the voucher, like the voucher system or voucher opportunities. So I don't really know. I've heard Justice Page and Kashkari, President Kashkari, I've heard them speak multiple times on this. And I feel like every time I'm walking away with still a fairly nebulous idea of how this is going to actually impact, like how we deliver education or what it's going to cost or, what's going to be required of us that's different from before. And so there has not been, Steve, I don't know if you've attended, Steve or Shannon, if you've attended any recent, I know they had a talk recently. So I don't know if any concrete or more specific information was shared, but I have not heard anything that helps me understand exactly what this is.
Well, I should say, I think it's in 2 weeks.
Next week.
What?
Next week.
Next week, okay.
Yep.
That the House author, Representative Moran, is going to be speaking at Rotary, and maybe you'd like to join in and ask some questions.
Okay. Carlos?
Rena.
Oh, okay.
Rena Moran. So this time next Tuesday.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Mhm.
Awesome.
And we've got a question in the chat box here from Brian saying, Hopkins was a pioneer in media literacy and technology skills, as well as ethics and media. How is that playing out now, especially with online learning? Oh, you're on mute, Doctor. There you go.
Sorry. So that's another great question. Our media specialists and our media paraprofessionals have been a really strong partner in facilitating distance learning for our learners and for our teachers. And they work very closely with people in a role called digital learning coaches. So, and we are blessed with the support from our community to provide a device for every child. So everyone, kindergarten through grade 12, right now at home has their own device. And so what happened was back, like even pre-COVID, we put out a request for proposal for a new learning management system. And then there was a vetting process, and we had, you know, a bunch of people come in. There were a couple of board members, parents, teachers who came in and looked at like the 3 top ones, and then Canvas was selected. And we weren't going to implement Canvas as our new LMS until way later. But we thought, oh my gosh, you know, like we're pivoting to full-time distance learning. We have to have a strong learning management system right now, because one of the complaints that we receive from our families is that, like with Moodle and Seesaw, like there were way too many technology platforms that students and families were navigating, and they wanted just like a single platform, right? Especially if they had like an elementary and a junior high and a senior high kid. So anyway, so the media specialists and media paras and the digital learning coaches have been extremely useful in helping us implement and launch and navigate Canvas, which is the key learning management system that everybody is on during distance learning. Now, we also partnered with Discovery Education, and they are providing a tool for us to help our students strengthen their inquiry, their research skills. And we're also working on sort of a new way of providing talent development and talent support to our students. And we think that it needs to have a strong research and inquiry component. So those are some of the ways that we continue, I think, to be on the front edge in terms of our, you know, our media services and technology, like access and usage. So hopefully that was specific enough.
Yeah, I was asking that question. What is Discovery? Could you repeat what that is? That's in conjunction with Canvas?
No, it's not in conjunction, but it is a major tool that actually United Health Group is paying us our subscription district-wide. So it's called Discovery Education. It's a $240,000 tool. Well, the access to it is $240,000 over 6 years, totally covered by United Health Group, which is really amazing. And if you go in there, then students and adults have access to all kinds of content, and teachers and media specialists have been using it to help students practice and strengthen their inquiry and research skills.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about relationships with parents. I mean, I think we are familiar with the disparities that exist in the state of Minnesota. And ideally, kids will have a caring parent that's making sure they're getting up and plugging in and turning the camera on and all of these types of things. And we know that even outside of a pandemic, it can be difficult to get, you know, the ideal amount of engagement with parents, much less right now. So I'm wondering kind of what type of outreach, are you doing new or different outreach? Have you heard new or different things from parents I know I'm grateful that my kids are teenagers and they're not littles right now. It's really a tough thing to do. So just curious, or even just maybe your personal perspective on how it's been going with parents in supporting the kids' educational goals and efforts.
You know, I think it's been a real challenge, and I think that there's a lot of silence around this because I do think that there are some families who, whether they are a, you know, well-resourced or low-resourced family, I do think there's a little bit of like, you know, kind of like acquiescence to like COVID and to being in this space, and like, you know, nobody's thriving right now, so I'm not going to complain, or I don't want to, you know, put more on the school system or whatever. So I do worry about, so for example, when we were in the midst of communicating with our families that we were probably going to have to pivot to distance learning, this parent wrote and said, why can't you just keep, like, I don't know, the kindergarten through third graders in school, right? Because families, they're going to accept your decision, and they're not going to complain if the full-time distance learning is too hard for them. They're just going to accept it. And it really made me think, like, wow, you know, I've done a little bit of that too. Like you accept whatever reality you're facing because everybody is facing a hardship, right? It's hard on systems, it's hard on individual people. So my concern, I guess I do have a lengthy way of just saying what the concern is. My concern is that unless people say, I'm having a hard time, I need help, we don't always know. And I feel like maybe there are quite a few families or students who are saying, I need help. However, we have gone, I think, to extraordinary lengths to reach out, and almost at the risk of, you know, like overly inundating people with surveys and with calls and with how are you doing, right? Like we don't want to totally piss people off, but we also, you know, we need to know if people need academic support, mental health support, individual tutoring, whatever it is. So like at one of our junior highs, they're doing these counselor chats. They sent out an email, a little 3-question survey to parents. What are you struggling with right now? Just identify the issues, and would you be willing to attend a few Google chats to, you know, like talk about these things and how we can support. We have parent meetings within our Somali, Spanish speaking, and Hmong communities that we're hosting on a weekly basis. There's all kinds of ways. The high school principal, she's new this year, and she is amazing, by the way. If you get to meet Crystal Ballard, your socks will be blown off. She's really an incredible leader in person, but she's been having like weekly Google chats with parents. So I know we're reaching out. I just worry if people are not saying what they need. I don't know if that answers your question, Michelle.
It does. You know, when working in social services, it's kind of the same thing
Yeah.
of where maybe you're not hearing a whole lot, but you know that this is harder than it's
Right.
ever been. And my fear is that when we do hear from people, it's when, you know, when the 12th hour, when it'll
Right.
be so far down the line.
Right.
As
And
you
we're
had
all-
mentioned.
Yeah, and we're all separated. So, you know.
Single parents, like
Yeah.
it just, you know, they're all going, what am I supposed to be doing? And we go, oh, just do the best you can. And that seems to be really just the expectation, and, you know, how that impacts kids is, you know, we'll find
Yeah.
out more, I suppose, in the long run, but thank you. I appreciate
Well,
it.
we got a data request from, so basically there's a law that says anybody can request almost any kind of data they want from an organization. I mean, they can't, you know, we can't give them names and stuff like that, but CARE 11 sent a data request, and they want to know how many students received failing grades in term 1, what our attendance rates are from September through now, and they're sending it to all of the districts. Right. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, like you read the report of, I think St. Paul Public Schools had, what was it? An astronomical number of their secondary students failing one or more classes. And so it's going to be, I think, challenging for all of us to look at these data points, which suggest both that COVID has been hard on all of us, and might suggest that schools haven't been doing enough, right? Because how can we allow 10 or 20 or 30% of our kids to have a failing grade? So,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. It's hard stuff for sure. And I guess my hope is that in the near future, before too long, we're looking at ways to help shore up the opportunities and experiences that were missed, so that this can be a unique experience, but in the end, kids have more opportunity to be successful after,
Yeah.
as you said, this highlights a lot of the inequities, and hopefully this will be the spur for some of the needed changes.
And I'm sure kids are learning a ton of new things during this time, right? Like advocacy and independence and being resourceful and making good decisions. And so hopefully those things are happening, and we just have to figure out a way to identify whether those things happened, and, you know, like what were these new things that kids acquired during this time.
I would dare say that young people today know more about the Electoral College than any of us ever did, you know, up until the last 10 years or something. My kids and others were following the count. So interesting the way the current events of the world also provide opportunities for learning. Well, we are at our time here. Thank you so much, Doctor. This has just been fascinating, and I think we could probably go on and on. You are absolutely invited to attend any of our future meetings, but we'll make sure that you're on the list for next week with that presentation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I hope I answered lots of questions that you came with.
You did great. So at the close here, as we always do with the Golden Valley Rotary Club, we are going to recite the 4-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And that concludes today's Golden Valley Rotary meeting. Have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the sunshine that I see out there, and we'll see you next week.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Rhoda.